Citroen's third generation C3 Super Mini has a much more distinctive style this time round, with quirky looks, a very individual feel, and even the option of a clever dashcam camera. Ultimately, there's nothing really revolutionary on offer here, but as a complete and highly personalisable package, it's desirably different.
Citroen knows a thing or two about small family cars, especially those with a dash or two of character. Here, after all, is the mark that over 60 years ago brought us the iconic 2CV, a model which established its maker as an innovator, an embracer of technology, and a brand in tune with the fickle finger of fashion. More recent products have struggled to live up to that heritage, but this one, the third generation C3 Super Mini, promises to deliver everything a real Citroen should be. Which would be refreshing. I mean, for sure, in the years since the 2CV, the brand has delivered further moments of shining innovation, design bravery and unadulterated quirkiness, but never to any great extent in the Super Mini segment. The 90s Saxo was a rebadged Peugeot 106, while in 2002 its first generation C3 successor was flimsy and forgettable. The second generation C3 of 2009 was a better product, but apart from a Zenith windscreen that extended up into the roof, there wasn't really anything very special about it. More was needed from the Mark III model, and more has been delivered. Which to some extent is surprising, given that under the skin and under the bonnet, this third generation C3 isn't really very different from the rather forgettable model that preceded it. The packaging, though, could hardly be more unique, cute and eminently fashionable as part of Citroen's plan to seek a more style-conscious kind of customer. Just about everything the brand could think of has been thrown at this design to that end. Two-tone paintwork, 3D rear light clusters, a floating style roof, and almost endless crossover queues. The unusual air bump side panels from the quirky C4 Cactus model even make an appearance for those looking to make the ultimate supermarket statement. The Citroen brand should stand for unusual technology too, delivered in this case by the connected cam camera setup. It's essentially a dash cam that in an accident will provide crucial footage before and after the impact. More cheerfully, the same lens can be used to snap away as you drive, sharing your journeying exploits over social media should that be your wish. Add in an efficient range of engines and fewer than 36 different exterior colour combinations and the kind of proper comfort-orientated suspension setup that a small Citroen ought to have, and you've got a small car that, well, on paper at least, ought to charm the right kind of buyer. Will it though? Let's find out. It's amazing how one driving trait can become so closely linked with one particular make of car. Now with Citroen, that defining character is ride quality, the suppleness that lets its vehicles glide over bumps and bad roads with a silky smoothness that rivals just quite often can't match. For the third generation C3, the French company has re-embraced that idea and also coined a phrase to describe it: Citroen Advanced Comfort. Now, to be honest, there's nothing particularly advanced on offer here. This car's old-tech PF1 platform and its conventional suspension setup is much the same as was used in the previous generation model. The difference this time around, though, lies in the way that the damping has been tuned. And you feel that almost immediately you set off on your test drive. Now, no attempt here has been made to provide a dynamic Fiesta-style driving experience. Instead, the suspension has more compliance than you'll find with rivals, and the result is that things like potholes and sleeping policemen will bother you far less than they usually would. It's almost enough for small but subtle changes to the way you go about driving. Now in the C3 you don't have to anticipate and avoid poorly surfaced stretches of road. You simply drive over them as if they didn't really exist. The downside to this is predictable, extra body lean through the corners. There's certainly more of that than you get in obvious rivals, and when you're dealing with this, it doesn't help that there isn't a great deal of feedback from the steering. Stay with it though, and you'll find that there's actually more grip and traction on offer than you might think. Pushing on through the turns simply requires you to adjust to this Citroen's more idiosyncratic style, but you're not going to want to do that unless you absolutely have to. I mean, the C3 just isn't that kind of car. Predictably, it's at its happiest in town, and that's not only because of the ride quality, but also thanks to a light and agile feel that's complemented by a tight 10.7 metre turning circle. Things aren't quite so good on the highway. Here, the lack of a tall 6-gear ratio for the manual gearbox can make the buzzy engine note a bit wearing. Tyre and wind noise, though, are no more intrusive than you'd find on rivals. Beneath the bonnet, the third generation model carries over the engines used in the final versions of its predecessor. The bulk of the range built around an efficient PSA Group 1.2 litre 3-cylinder petrol PureTech unit that develops either 68 or 82 bhp in normally aspirated form, or 110 bhp if, as is the case here, it's been fitted out with a turbocharger. Now, unless you really are on a very tight budget, we'd try and give that entry-level 68 bhp power plant a swerve. You really have to rev it to make any kind of meaningful progress, and that doesn't do much for the refinement or the efficiency. The 82 bhp engine is a marginally better bet. A slight increase in torque improves the rest to 62 miles an hour time from 14 seconds to 12.8 seconds, but it does nothing for the top speed, which remains pegged at 107 miles an hour. It's a real pity that the 110 bhp PureTech engine isn't more affordable, because, as we've been finding over the last few days, it really is a very sweet little unit. The turbo nearly doubles this little power plant's pulling power, and the result is that overtaking moves that would be white-knuckle manoeuvres in the entry-level models can be safely completed with hardly a thought. The 62 miles an hour sprint here occupies just 9.3 seconds, and that is en route to 117 miles an hour. That's if you're quick with the 5-speed manual gearbox, which isn't all that easy because the stick has an annoyingly long throw, and it's got a rather vague feel too. If you want an auto transmission alternative, then this top PureTech engine is the only unit in the range that can provide it, the EAT6 setup in question being a proper full auto. Previous generation self-shifting C3 models used to use a jerky belt-driven EGS system that required you to lift off between changes if you wanted to maintain smooth progress. There are some 1.6 litre Blue HDI diesel options too, although Citroen expects only around 25% of C3 buyers to choose them. First up is the 75 bhp motor that returns the same kind of performance stats as we quoted for the base petrol unit, but it feels a lot more eager thanks to its 233 Nm torque output. If you want more diesel performance, you'd really need to be a higher mileage driver to justify that. But if you can, the Blue HDI 100 variant at the top of the range manages 62 miles an hour from rest in 10.6 seconds on the way to 115 miles an hour. It's a shame there isn't the option of an automatic gearbox, because that motor's 254 newton meters of torque would be well suited to a self-shifter. At last, Citroen models are starting to look unique and different once more. In 2014, the brand's C4 Cactus model started that trend, and this third generation C3 continues it with a look that, according to its maker, is distinctively offbeat. Well, the styling's certainly unusual, all fluid curves and muscular flanks, with a stance that's almost, well, SUV-like. Get a version that's all colour kitted out like this one, and you'll be really making quite a supermarket statement. So let's get up close and personal, starting at the nose, where Citroen's current frontal trademark, this two-tier light structure, makes it on one of the company's smaller models for the first time. These chrome strips extend from the upper lamps to the centre, and they meet to form the classic double chevron badge. Below that lies the main grille with a wider air intake underneath that's flanked on plusher models like this one by fog lights that are housed in mouldings that are colour coordinated with the door mirrors and the roof. In profile, the short, high stance is even more evident, with SUV overtones emphasised on most models by these crossover-style black wheel arch extensions that frame eye-catching alloy rims of either 15, 16 or, as in this case, 17 inches in size. Now, if you shift your gaze further up, you'll find black windscreen pillars and upper door sections that work with that little strip at the rear buttress to create the illusion of a floating roof. That's something especially emphasised by the two-tone top that's standard above entry-level trim. Now, with this car, the roof section's painted black, so that floating effect isn't so pronounced, but there is the option of ordering your C3 with either red or white roof finishing that makes that more obvious. Also colour personalisable is perhaps the bodywork's most notable talking point, these side cladding panels known by the brand as air bumps. Avoid entry-level trim, and these raised thermoplastic polyurethane mouldings are either optional or standard, and they're there to act as a defence mechanism against the everyday dents and dings caused to your side panels by things like supermarket trolleys or somebody else's car door. In fact, Citroen reckons you could scrape a shopping trolley right down the side of a C3 and the air bumps would save it from damage. Do bear in mind, though, that protection from a head-on hit does depend on the stray trolley hitting the air bump spot on. Move to the rear and the crossover cues continue, most notably with this full-width black plastic lower bumper with its raised protective corner sections. The upper part of the bumper is finished in body colour, and it extends up to these light clusters that are finished in a 3D design that's supposed to give them extra depth. Otherwise, the tailgate's fairly conventional, with a large central Citroen badge and a subtle roof spoiler that integrates a high-level third brake light. Of course, what's more important is the stuff that you can't see. Now, in this case, something that's not especially sophisticated. This car's PF1 platform essentially carried over from the previous generation C3 range. Time to take a seat inside. Now, don't worry, you don't have to have it like this. This test car's cabin is finished with the optional Hype Colorado ambiance package that gives you these extrovertly bright brown trimming highlights on the seats, on the dashboard, on the floor mats, and even on the steering wheel. Now, after all this, the alternative interior trimming pack, Urban Red Ambiance, it'll seem rather restrained, and the standard interior finish will seem stultifyingly dull. I can't help thinking that it must have been possible to design a trimming package that offers, something bright and different without being too over the top. Well, one day perhaps Citroen will offer such a thing, but for the time being at least, there's a choice between either ordinary or, rather extreme. Perhaps that's a little unkind. After all, once you take a closer look, there's plenty that isn't ordinary about the way this interior has been designed. If you viewed other sections of this film, then you'll already know about the connected camera that sits behind this rear view mirror and allows owners of plushly specified C3 models to share their road trip photos and videos directly with friends and family. But there's a great deal more than that to set this cabin apart. These designer luggage-themed overstitched door pulls, for example, the retro-style instrument dial graphics, the intricately fashioned chrome-trimmed vents, the door bins with their unusual contrast-coloured interiors, and there's even a reverse air bump theme happening on the doors and the speaker grills. I mean, it all attempts to continue that cheery demeanour that was established before you got in. To be honest, we would have happily traded some of this feel-good frippery for the feature that set the previous generation C3 model's cabin apart. A clever zenith windscreen that extended the glasswork above your head into the roof section, and which offered a wonderful view forward that was especially helpful when you were stopped under a traffic light. That's been ditched, presumably on grounds of cost, the designers having had to factor in an allowance for extra multimedia solutions this time around, specifically this centre dash 7-inch colour touchscreen that's standard on the two upper trim levels. Now, as on other PSA Group models, it's there to declutter the dashboard, and also as on other PSA Group models, it goes too far by including ventilation controls and concealing them behind menus that can be really awkward to instantly access when you're using the screen's other functions. These include a DAB radio, the Bluetooth phone connection, the mirror screen with Apple CarPlay connectivity, and the optional Citroen Connect navigation system. Now, that monitor is shared with the C4 Cactus model that inspired this one. Thankfully, though, the C3 goes its own way with the steering wheel and the instrument design, so you're not stuck with the Cactus's ugly tiller and its all-digital instrument display. You do get a digital speedo readout in the centre of the binnacle, but that's not at the expense of a proper gauge. As for all-round visibility, it's not great over your shoulder, thanks to the shallow rear screen and the thick rear pillars, which might be an issue because you have to stretch to the very top of the range to get rear parking sensors and a reversing camera as standard. And while we're griping, we'll also moan about the tiny size of the cup holders in front of the gear stick and the fact that, as usual on PSA Group products, half the glove box capacity is eaten up by the fuse box. The 6¼ litre space that remains will, the brand says, be enough to take a small thermos flask. Otherwise, issues of practicality have been quite effectively addressed. You get a compartment that's intended for your phone in front of the gear stick, and that's near to a provided 12-volt aux-in and USB socket, while another less usefully sized cubby lies a little further up the centre stack. There's another small stowage area by the driver's right knee. Plus, of course, you've got the unusually finished door bins we mentioned earlier. They're big enough to take a 500ml bottle of water if you were to lay it on its side. Their light interior colouring will, as Citroen suggests, make locating small items easier. It'll also, though, make them look grubbier quicker. C'est la vie. So, time to take a seat in the rear. Now, the falling roofline means you've got to watch your head on entry, but these wide opening doors compensate a little for that. Once you're inside, it's quickly evident that this isn't one of the more spacious Super Minis in the segment. The room and off will be fine for kids, of course, but adults stuck behind reasonably tall compatriots up front may well struggle a bit when it comes to room for their legs and knees. Now, as usual in the car of this class, you can forget being able to seat 3 adults back here in any degree of real comfort. And that's something that's further restricted in this case by the height of the centre transmission tunnel. And talking of restrictions, tall adults will find headroom at something of a premium, especially on a model like this one that's fitted out with the otherwise very desirable panoramic glass roof. But then, how often is it really necessary to transport burly adults for any real distance in a Super Mini? Almost never. For the role that a car like this will typically be asked to play in an average family, what's been provided here will, for most buyers, probably be quite sufficient. And, to be fair to Citroen, the designers have freed up 2 centimetres more shoulder room than was offered by the previous generation model. Plus, the shape and the positioning of the front seats gives rear-seated folk a very good view forward. Practicalities, well, they include Isofix child seat fastenings, centre cup holder, matte pockets in the seat backs, and smaller versions of those contrast-coloured door bins we saw up front. Last but not least, let's take a look in the boot. Lift the tailgate, and after the relative restrictions of the rear seat, it's something of a surprise to find that the 300-litre space provided here is one of the larger cargo bays in the Super Mini segment. Now, there might be a slight issue getting stuff in, though, thanks to this high loading lip and a slight restriction to the opening aperture because of this funky taillight design. Now, because there's no adjustable boot floor option, there's quite a drop from the bumper sill to the luggage bed too. What's available here will be enough for a decently sized suitcase, but you'd have to pack quite cleverly to squeeze in overnight bags beside it. On the plus side, there are no significant boot area intrusions, so stacking your various bags ought to be quite simple. To extend the space, you can use these buttons near the headrests to push forward the 60/40 split folding rear backrest and free up as much as 922 litres, although with these chairs tipped forward there's quite a step in the load floor. Under the floor, as usual, sits the Space Saver spare wheel, although bear in mind that you'll have to pay extra for one of these if budget restricts you to entry-level trim. Now's the time to get down to brass tacks and find out what the C3 costs and what you get for the money. Now, the bottom line here is that this is one of the most affordable Super Minis you can choose, with base petrol variants from around £11,000 and base diesels from around £13,500. There's a single 5-door body style and 3 levels of specification: touch, feel, and at the top of the range, flare trim, and that's what we've got here. Want a little more detail? Well, let's get to that. Now, most buyers will be choosing the 1.2-litre 3-cylinder PureTech petrol engine at the foot of the range, and there's a £700 premium to pay if you want to progress from the base 68 bhp version of that unit to the pokier 82 bhp variant. Now, if you're prepared to trade up to mid-range field trim, you can also opt to pay a further £1,200 to get this particular car's turbocharged PureTech 110 version of that power plant. Although by that point, you'll be spending well over £15,000. Now, this turbo unit is the only engine in the range of any kind that can be ordered with an auto gearbox, an EAT6 transmission that's a £1,200 option if you choose this engine with top-spec flare trim. So, what about the diesel options? Well, you're going to need to think carefully about whether these can actually be justified. The base Blue HDI 75 unit does, after all, cost nearly £2,500 more than the PureTech 68 petrol model. And the petrol model already does over 60 miles per gallon in regular use and puts out under 110 grams per kilometre of CO2. Do you really need more frugality than that? Well, if you do and find yourself prepared to stretch to mid-range field trim, then your dealer will offer you the option of finding another £600 for the Pokia Blue HDI 100 power plant, although by that point you'll be paying around £16,500. On to the value proposition those figures represent. Now, most manufacturers price position their city car offering comfortably clear of their Super Mini segment model, but Citroen's chosen not to do that here, to the point where a base C3 costs only a few £100 more than a mid-spec C1 with exactly the same engine. Now, on that basis, we'd suggest that this C3 offers a lot more car for the money. And the car's proposition looks even better when you compare it to its in-house PSA Group stablemate, Peugeot's 208, which shares exactly the same engine wear and underpinnings. Now, if you compare like-for-like C3 and 208 models, in most cases the Citroen enjoys a price advantage of up to £3,000 and offers a larger boot and a funkier personality. So, you're getting the idea here. The pricing has been very sharply pitched indeed. It's something that becomes even more obvious when you start to compare this C3 against the Super Mini segment big hitters. Think in terms of needing about £1,500 more for an equivalent Vauxhall Corsa and about £2,500 more for a comparable Ford Fiesta or Volkswagen Polo, and you won't be too far out. Now, even cars in this segment you might expect to be quite affordable. Models like Seat's Ibiza, Kia's Rio and Renault's Clio are all around £1,000 more in entry-level form, with the difference often widening the further up the range you progress. And Superminis like the Toyota Yaris, the Mazda 2 and the Honda Jazz are a fraction pricier still. That's not to say that there aren't models in this sector that are directly priced against this Citroen. Skoda's Fabia and Hyundai's i20 represent equally good value in the class, although neither can offer the kind of cheeky, personalised feel you get with this C3. Suzuki's Swift does offer a bit more of that, and it could save you around £1,500, but it's smaller inside and in the boot than a C3. Beyond those options, you'll find yourself looking at the real bargain basement brands. So an MG3 could potentially save you around £2,500, while a Dacia Sandero is significantly cheaper still. In both cases, though, you get what you don't pay for. So the design is cruder and the running costs of the older tech engines will be higher. If, having considered all of that, you conclude that it is a C3 that you really want, you're going to need to know just how generous Citroen's been with the standard specification. So, let's take a look at that. Now, even entry-level touch spec gets you features like Bluetooth phone connectivity, 4-speaker DAB stereo system with USB and aux-in connections, cruise control with a speed limiter, and a height-adjustable driver's seat. It'd be a pity, though, to buy a C3 and not have access to the features that make this third-generation model so unique. Now, for those, you're going to need to stretch to at least mid-range field trim, which is a starting point for a wider range of trim options as well as a wider range of engines. Plus, of course, the specification is much better, including many of the stylistic features that make this car look special. Things like the contrast-coloured roof and the matching door mirrors, the wheel arch extensions, the body-coloured door handles, 16-inch matrix alloy wheels and the LED daytime running lights. You'll also need field trim to get, well, what is arguably the interior's most significant feature, the 7-inch colour infotainment touchscreen. And that is your access point for the 6-speaker stereo and mirror screen feature that, via Apple CarPlay, will allow you to duplicate the functionality of your smartphone onto the fascia monitor. Other key feel inclusions run to automatic air conditioning, powered windows front and rear, a space-saver spare wheel, and remote controls on the steering wheel for the phone connection and the stereo activation. At field level, you'll also be offered the option of what is probably this C3 model's most unusual feature, these side-mounted air bump panels. Now, you'll need this particular car's top flare level of trim to get these as standard, though. And that's a trim level that also gets you the feature that at launch was this C3 model's other main talking point, the connected cam Citroen package. And with that, you get an integrated camera with a 128GB memory that's positioned in front of the rear view mirror housing, giving the lens a 120-degree view of what's ahead of the car. Now, you can use it to take fun pictures that via a dedicated app can be stored or uploaded to social media sites. Plus, the camera also acts as a dash cam that would automatically save video footage 30 seconds before and 1 minute after a collision. Now, this can be used as evidence to your insurer that you weren't at fault, and it uses GPS satellite tracking to pinpoint the location and time of an event like that. As for other flare specification features, style-orientated touches include colour coordination surrounding front fog lights that turn with the bends. The air bump panels can be colour coordinated too, and there's privacy glass for the back windows, plus rear parking sensors, a leather stitched steering wheel, a reversing camera, and automatic headlights and wipers. Enough of the standard stuff. What about options? Well, most of these are style-orientated features. So go for mid-range feel spec, as most customers will, and you'll be offered an optional style pack that gives you the air bump panels and the front fog lights, with both features colour personalisable. And on that subject, if you don't like the standard flat paint bodywork colours, then there are a range of metallic options that can be coordinated with red, white or black roof finishes, and also wheels of different styles that are 15, 16 or, as in this case, 17 inches in size. Inside, there are two interior trim packages to choose from. Relatively restrained is the red-themed urban red ambiance option, but you'd have to be quite an extrovert to carry off the Hype Colorado ambiance pack that's been fitted to our test car, which has bright brown trimming that covers the dashboard, the edges of the floor mats, the seat facings, even the steering wheel. Of course, there are a few extra cost features that don't concern the aesthetics. Cars fitted with the 7-inch infotainment screen can be upgraded with Citroen Connect navigation. A keyless entry and start feature will save you looking for the fob when you've got your hands full, and a panoramic roof will let more light into the cabin. Now, if you've gone for a mid-range feel spec C3, you'll also be offered the chance to pay extra for that connected cam camera that I was talking about earlier. Plus, at this level of the range, there'll also be two further option bundles to consider. A light pack that includes the panoramic roof and the rear privacy glass, and a comfort and visibility pack that throws in automatic headlights, reversing sensors, and an auto-dimming rear-view mirror. So, on to safety. Now, laudably, the French brand has included 3 elements of technology that you wouldn't expect to find as standard on a car of this price. The first of these, the lane departure warning system, will alert you if at speed the car starts wandering over the lane delineating lines. Then there's a coffee break alert feature that reminds you to take a break on long journeys, say after 2 hours at average speeds of over 40 miles an hour. And we also like the standard speed recognition and speed warning feature that pictures speed signs as you pass and then displays them on the dash. Now, the recorded figures can then easily be set into the standard cruise control speed limiter, meaning that, well, in theory at least, you'll never be zapped by a speed camera ever again. So, otherwise, the standard safety tally is pretty much as you would expect it to be on a modern Super Mini. Every C3 comes with twin front, side and curtain airbags, Isofix child seat mounts and hill start assist that stops the car from rolling backwards as you pull away on inclines. If you go for the optional navigation system, you also get the Citroen Connect box with emergency and assistance package. And this will automatically contact the emergency services with your location in the event of a collision. Now, with this top flare trim level, it's possible to add in blind spot monitoring as a standalone extra, and that system's there to alert you if at speed you're about to dangerously pull out in front of another vehicle. Buyers of a C3 fitted out in mid-range field trim can get that blind spot feature packaged up with rear parking sensors as part of a driver aid pack. Another option you can ask your dealer about is active city brake, one of those autonomous braking setups that scans the road ahead as you drive for potential collision hazards. Now, if one is detected, you'll be warned. If you don't respond, or perhaps you're unable to, then the brakes will automatically be applied to decrease the severity of any resulting accident. Efficiency is definitely another C3 strength. I mean, first, because its PSA Group engines are amongst the cleanest and the most frugal in the industry, and second, because this third generation model is impressively light, boasting a curb weight of just 976 kilograms in base petrol form. To give you some perspective on that, a rival Vauxhall Corsa can be up to 165 kilograms heavier in the same entry-level petrol guise, and that's a difference equating to the kind of weight saving you make if you asked your entire family to get out and walk. So, how much difference does all that engine technology and featherweight construction make to the actual fuel and CO2 figures that this car can achieve? Well, let's see. The base 68 and 82 bhp normally aspirated 1.2 litre PureTech petrol units both achieve identical readings, 60.1 mpg on the combined cycle and 108 grams per kilometre of CO2. Now, if you stretch up to the turbocharged 110 bhp 1.2 litre PureTech petrol power plant we've been trying here, then you'll get an engine stop-start system, which means that the quoted fuel return for this variant is hardly any different to that of the normally aspirated models, and the CO2 reading is actually better. Specifically, with the PureTech 110 variant, you're looking at 61.4 mpg and 103 grams per kilometre, or 57.6 mpg and 110 grams per kilometre if you choose this unit with the optional EAT6 automatic gearbox. Basically, most petrol-powered Super Mini rivals can only match those figures with sophisticated engine technology, which will typically be limited to the much pricier models. With the C3, you get it right from the range starting point. Predictably, this car's diesel figures also look good. Expect 80.7 mpg on the combined cycle and 92 grams per kilometre of CO2 from the Blue HDI 75 variant, and 76.3 mpg and 95 grams per kilometre if you go for the Blue HDI 100 model. Now, that isn't class leading, but it's certainly right up there. Both diesel engines also come with the stop and start system fitted as standard, and every C3 in the range has a gear efficiency indicator to tell the driver which is the best cog to be in to use the least fuel. Now, keep an eye on that and drive with frugality as a priority, and you should be able to eke out an impressive range from the 45 litre fuel tank, around about 600 miles from a PureTech petrol and up to 800 miles from one of the diesels. So, how have the PSA Group engineers been able to achieve such strong efficiency showings with the engines across the C3 range? Well, with the PureTech petrol units, the answer lies in reduced weight and a 30% reduction in mechanical losses due to friction. If you switch your attention to Citroen's Blue HDI diesel technology, well, the answer there lies in a clever three-step after-treatment system that's designed to better eliminate the four nasty pollutants that diesel units usually put out, namely unburnt hydrocarbons, carbon monoxide, nitrogen oxides and particulates. Now, the first stage sees the unwanted hydrocarbon and carbon monoxide elements converted into harmless water and carbon dioxide. In the second stage, that nasty nitrogen oxide also gets converted into water via a selective catalytic reduction process, and that uses a urea and water mixture that's called AdBlue, although you will need to get that mixture topped up every 12,500 miles. And finally, in the third step, a particulate emissions filter eliminates virtually all the particulates but a stroke. Enough about engine efficiency. What about other financial considerations? Well, regular service intervals come around every 16,000 miles or 12 months, depending on which comes soonest. For many Super Mini owners, that will mean a visit to the dealer once a year, and there are plenty of Citroen outlets to choose from, so you should never be too far from one. So you can budget ahead. The French maker offers its Citroen maintenance scheme that lets you pay either a one-off fee or monthly instalments to cover the cost of your routine maintenance for as long as 3 years or 35,000 miles. Every C3 comes with a 3-year and 60,000 mile warranty, and there's also European-wide breakdown assistance included from new for the first year you own the car. Looking at the longer term, you also have a 12-year guarantee against rust and 36-month cover for any paintwork defects, although that doesn't include stone chips and other wear and tear damage. Onto insurance, where the groupings are a touch higher than those of typically less efficient rivals. Your premium for the entry-level 1.2 litre PureTech petrol model with 68 bhp will be based on a Group 8E rating. Move up to the 82 bhp version and it sits in Group 10E, while the 110 bhp turbocharged variant gets a Group 16E rating for the manual. For those wanting the diesel engines, the less powerful Blue HDI 75 model is rated at Group 16E and the Blue HDI 100 derivative is in Group 20A. And lastly, whether you're leasing the C3 or buying it outright with your own hard-earned cash, you're going to want to know what it's going to be worth when you come to move it on. Now, that means looking at residual values, and this third generation of Citroen Super Mini performs much better than its predecessors. Independent experts reckon that after the usual industry standard 3-year and 30,000 mile ownership period, your C3 will be worth 40 to 45% of its original asking price. Now that is a very strong result for Citroen, and it's better than a Fiesta or a Vauxhall Corsa. It's not very far off a VW Polo. What do you want from a Super Mini? Definitive driving dynamics? A supremely spacious cabin? Well, if so, look beyond this Citroen. If, though, you want a car with a little joie de vivre, personalisable to a point where you'll really feel like it's yours, then we think this C3 is a car you may well like very much indeed. OK, so some of the things that make it different might be seen as slightly contrived. Sticking a dash cam camera onto the rearview mirror isn't quite the same as pioneering air suspension after all. But at least Citroen is once again trying to set its products apart in the way they look and feel after decades of serving up rebadged Peugeots. Inevitably, you have got to spend a bit of money to get the full effect, but so tightly has this car been priced that for most potential buyers, there'll be plenty of scope to do that. Of course, there will be lots of people who just won't get what this car's trying to be. After all, there isn't really any need for crossover queues on a Super Mini. You can probably survive a trip to the supermarket without the protection of the air bump side panels. And will your friends really want connected cam pictures of your journey to the gym on their Twitter feeds? Well, probably not. If you are tempted to take that perspective, then you'd probably be better off considering another contender in the class. A Super Mini that might well be better to drive. It might be more spacious inside than this one, but also a car that might well feel bland and boring after experience with this Citroen. All of which leaves us, well, where? From an objective point of view, this C3 isn't the best car in its class. Subjectively, though, you could easily argue that there's nothing in the segment to touch it. It all depends on how you view the automotive world. We think this C3 makes it a brighter place.